Welcome to Guardians of the Data. I'm your host, Ward Balzerzak. Each episode will explore the passions, expertise, and real world experiences of security leaders who are helping the future of data security and governance. Guardians of the Data is made possible by support from Centra. To learn more about our AI powered data security platform, please visit centra.io. Let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of Guardians of the Data. Got a great guest lined up today. He's a cybersecurity leader and advisor with over a decade of experience. Currently, the Data Security Advisory Practice Director at TBD Cyber. Zach Luze, welcome to the show.
Ward, thank you so much for having me today. Happy to be here.
Really excited to have you here. Let's jump right in. Are you ready?
Yes.
Awesome. In your professional opinion, what's the biggest challenge that organizations are facing when it comes to data security?
This is a great question because there's a lot of ways we could go here. There's a lot of challenges that they face when it comes to data security. But somewhat ironically, I think that the biggest challenge that we face when it comes to data security is showing value. And that's a problem because when you think about an organization's IT spend and their security spend, there are a lot of priorities that they do focus on. And data security is just one of those. And if you aren't able to show value, then your budgets get impacted, your resources get impacted, and you have a harder time demonstrating more value by solving more problems. And the reason I say it's a bit ironic is that normally when people show value, where do they go? They go right to data. They try to show metrics to demonstrate to people how much value they're producing. And it's a little funny that the folks who are data is in their name struggle so much with producing meaningful KPIs, key result, the OKRs, metrics. Almost every data security program I work with, they struggle in this regard. And there's a few reasons for it that I think we can get into, but it really, I think, is slowing the progress of data security in many organizations.
Yeah, I'm going to hold up my hand on that one. Guilty as charged on, struggling to show value. And I wish it wasn't the case. And what you said resonates, right? Like, you got to show value, number one. And the folks that are dealing with data struggle to use data to show the value. Each of the data security programs I've built, I've been blessed to have really smart people that have worked for me, and generally we've started with the people, process, and technology, right? Hire the team, build the process, purchase or leverage technology to do it. And I've always told my team members, like, let's start the timer, right? The shot clock, if you will. We're going to be asked in 30, 60, 90, 180 days, whatever, what value are you bringing? And everybody wants to show those sexy metrics, right? Here's the number of things we stopped. Here's the number of bad guys we stopped, whatever. So love that answer. I'm curious, how do folks solve it? How are you pushing people? How are you seeing folks actually crack that nut and show value for their programs?
Right. I think I'll go back a little bit and provide some background here as to how I think people have traditionally tried to solve it, and then a bit of a blended approach that I recommend for most organizations and where I see a lot of value. So one of the struggles with data security is that people, for it to really, really matter for an executive, they want to know the type of data that you're protecting and the value of that data. Now, this requires understanding what that data is. And so for any one security control or any one new process that you roll out, understanding these are the categories of data that are at risk and that now we have remediated or are now protecting where we didn't before. And here's how much we are saving the organization from a risk management perspective. But technically and organizationally, this has just been a challenge because organizations don't understand where their sensitive data lives comprehensively. They might have rough order of magnitude, directionally correct ideas. We have this database, and that's going to have a lot of crown jewels. And we know that this department uses this file share, so we expect there's going to be a lot of sensitive data there. But how is it sprawling throughout the organization? And how do we detect this data at scale? And institutionally, there's no way an organization who deals with any scale of data is going to understand that. And so they will turn to technology, discovery platforms, which for the past, I don't know how long, 20, 30 years have been promising people, if you implement our product with very little work, our product is going to be smart enough to tell you where all of your sensitive data lives. And traditionally, what these tools tend to be are keyword matching, regex type instruments that are okay at detecting some types of data, but a lot of the secret sauce of what makes a business run and what's really sensitive can't get out, they're going to have a hard time detecting. And so they just dump out to you a whole bunch of logs of here's all these files and some elements that we detected in these files, but it's up to you to figure out what's a false positive and really put this together to come up with the mosaic of here's where my sensitive data is. And so then I think what organizations end up, so some of them, they'll get kind of caught in this trap of trying to discover all the data and then right size the controls. When they run into challenges there, sometimes they'll try to be really pragmatic. And I think this is a good approach, but they'll say, all right, I'm going to start putting some, minimally viable type data security controls on the perimeter. So I'm going to look at my endpoints. Are people uploading data to USB? They are. Well, we should probably block that. We have OneDrive, and those are still good. Those are great, but they only get you so far because at the end of the day, the type of metric that generates is we had 5 terabytes of data last quarter that went to these unsanctioned locations, and now we've blocked it. And now we only see 50 gigabytes because 5 users have exceptions. But then the question that a really savvy executive or CIO might ask is, well, what was that data? Was it just personal data? Because if it was just personal data, I don't care. And then you get back to that discovery question that you were trying to ignore now of how do I identify which of this data is sensitive and or valuable and how valuable it is.
Cyclical.
And that's exactly. And so it all comes back to that. And that's so challenging to do.
Yeah, I mean, I've had that a number of times. Just kept reflecting back on a few statements you made, and thinking back to my last organization. So, I agree with you, right? A lot of organizations try to start with understanding one, what is your sensitive data? Two, where is it? And I know my last organization, that's where I tried to start. And I had a lot of folks that would kind of throw up the blocker to me and say, well, I don't care. Like, that's a waste of time. That's not valuable. I'm telling you, Ward, that our sensitive data is PII and stuff like that. And I don't care unless it leaves. And I remember just having these cyclical conversations that, like, yes, I understand. We don't care that data is internally. It should be internally, right? But in order to keep it from going outside, I need to know a little bit more than, hey, it's PII or it's PCI data, because to the other point you made, for years, tools have identified that via regex, for better or for worse, from a false positive perspective. Um, but it doesn't always make it equal, right? PII in one form could be different than PII in another form. There could be toxic combinations and so on and so forth. So, anyways, going back to the last organization, it was really hard for me to break through and tell folks, like, I hear you again, you only care if it leaves, but I got to start internally to understand what we have, to put the sensible controls around it to prevent it from going out. And it kind of goes back to your problem statement showing value. I had a hard time, even with doing data discovery, saying, hey, we've got X gigs, terabytes, whatever of sensitive data in these locations. I had a lot of problems with folks caring about those numbers, right? They're like, oh yeah, of course we've got all of that sensitive data in that particular location. I told you it's going to be there, right? Told you so. Um, So it was always a pain and a little bit discouraging from a data security perspective to say like, okay, yeah, you told me so. I brought you numbers. Where do we go now? Essentially, was kind of where we would always get stuck.
Right. Yes, I completely agree. And, one of the challenges there is that if you do this, a large scale data discovery effort and well done discovery effort is going to be expensive from a resourcing and potentially a tooling perspective. It just takes time. What is the metric that you have to generate after you've done that? Is it now we have a complete understanding, we have coverage, we have complete coverage of understanding of all the uh, basic data classes or data types, whatever you might want to call them, in all of our different repositories on cloud and on-prem and SaaS. Uh, who cares? That's going to be the response that you get. And so that's some of the challenge statement. I think now perhaps getting to some of how you can address it. I think it's a bit of a layered approach. And what I have seen success with working with clients on or when being in industry myself is blending those two approaches. So whenever you're building or evolving your data security practice, you want to identify what's some of the low hanging fruit where we can actually show protection, detection and response, or training of our end users to better protect data. But something that we can do with what we know now and the tools we have today uh, to show some amount of a win. And so that could be blocking USB, that could be blocking uploads to certain unsanctioned repositories. Maybe it's identifying unbelievably stale data in a repository and getting rid of it. So we're reducing risk, we're also reducing storage costs. There's a few ways you can go about it, but build that service and make it good. And that service then kind of becomes a cash cow there's a little bit of money you make off of that every quarter from a political capital perspective that then allows you to do your more expensive R&D from a discovery standpoint. So you can at least give some metrics and show we had data going out through this vector. We had this type of data that was stale in the organization. Sorry, I don't know exactly what type of data it is right now. I can give you some pointers on what I think it was, but I don't have all that detail yet. But here's risk we have tangibly reduced. Now, if you want to learn more about what this data is and get to the next level, which is truly right-sized risk reduction measures, more accurate risk quantification on what we're doing, I need to do this discovery effort. And then that's where you can, I think, get more of the political capital and investment to do deeper discovery.
Well, it sounds like, based on your statement there, you could even use that to fund your program, your next steps a little bit, right? So what I heard you say, and I've seen this too. I've tried to advocate for this, but you're doing that data discovery. You're going to find inevitably you're going to find stale data that hasn't been touched or looked at in a very long time, or you're going to find duplicate data. I don't know how often you see that with your clients, but I know duplicate data has been a real thing, right? Think of those spreadsheets that are sitting out there. John Smith goes and grabs it, copies it locally, maybe slightly modifies it, maybe not, and Sally goes and does the same thing, and now we have this proliferation of data. But what I find interesting there is identify all of that, look to reduce it where possible, right? Delete it, archive it, right? Whatever at that point. And oh my goodness, you start, putting a dollar value to that. You can start to showcase, hey boss, hey C-suite executives, whatever. Um, we've just saved the organization X dollars. Yay, right? Gold star, put me on a pedestal, whatever. Oh, by the way, we want to do more, right? In the name of data security, here's our next steps. Here's the cost, but hopefully it's equal at that point. Do you go through those exercises with some of your clients?
Absolutely. And I think there's a couple of things I want to touch on there. One is uh, we really are getting to the point now where I feel like before people started storing the preponderance of their data in the cloud, there was always this promise of we can identify stale data, get rid of it, and save from a storage perspective. But when it was all on-prem repositories, it never really came to fruition. Because if you have a bunch of file shares, Who cares if they have a terabyte or 50 terabytes on them? You already own the hardware. You're not paying for more stuff. The story's changing now with cloud, where you have, I mean, my gosh, if you've done anything, for folks who have done anything in cloud, you can appreciate just how much, if it's just a gigabyte here or maybe even a terabyte there, it's not a big deal. But if you start talking terabytes and petabytes, it can be a lot of money that you are spending on this. So there are real cost savings, which is fantastic. So whenever we can find that, I think is great. And then another item that I think you touched on some is just during that discovery phase, try not to be too waterfall with it, where you say we're discovering from here to there. And then once we've discovered everything, then we'll think through remediation. No, these sort of projects are all about agility and being flexible. You don't exactly know what your greatest wins are when you start these projects out because you don't know what data is there. Be flexible as you're going through. You might discover some repository that everyone in the organization has access to and no one expected it. Stop what you're doing, fix that. That's a great win. And so just following those paths to find who your greatest advocates are, who see the value in the tool, working with them, finding those sort of use cases like, oh my gosh, we just uncovered this trove of data, and then pausing for a moment and building in space to do some remediation activities during your discovery is going to help keep the momentum going for that project.
Yeah, I think that last piece is definitely key. And then there's been a few organizations that I've talked to lately when I sit down and say, okay, data security, what are you looking to do? Right. And they start kind of throwing around some of their problem statements. They start talking to me about some data discovery, for example. Here's what we want to do for data discovery. And I always kind of pause them and say, okay, what's your journey? And sometimes I get that blank stare, and I have to define what I'm talking about. And the idea is to what you just said, like, how are you going to step into this? From a data discovery perspective, are you really going to scan everything? End state, that's where you should be looking to go, right? You should have visibility into your entire data real estate and understand what's there. But that should be end state. You don't, in my opinion, you don't want to scan everything, wait till everything is done, have hundreds to thousands to hundreds of thousands of findings, and then you're like, oh my goodness, what the heck do I do? I am buried. I am buried. Where do I go next? And I always say, like, I like to use the bathtub analogy at times. Like, first, let's stop filling the bathtub. So let's put in some controls. Um, then let's look to start slowly draining, right? Either use a bucket, a teacup, whatever, to take out some water bit by bit, understand the data. Maybe it's by a repository, a section of, and to the point you made, if you find something there, stop, pause, do the remediation or whatever it is, education, whatever, and then move on to the next. Do you find a lot of success with your clients going that route?
I do. And then one thing I do want to mention is that I couldn't agree more about it can't be one mono. I guess it could be. I would agree with you. I wouldn't recommend doing one monolithic discovery followed then by, your 8 months of remediation. It needs to be
If you're lucky.
interspersed. And some people might hear this and think this is a straw man, but no, this is literally the approach that a lot of people take because it looks easy and nice on a project management like Kanban board or something like that, or a Gantt chart. But it's not always the best approach, I'm telling you. And many folks who've done this probably resonate with that. But that said, there is a balance though, where I have encountered this before with some folks where the set for various reasons, whether it's cost or just getting organizational buy-in, that initial set of data that they scan is just too small. So you do want to get some sort of representative sample, because what if you just scan one account in AWS or one subscription in Azure, and it just so happens, which most of, if you're a decently run security organization, most subscriptions, most accounts, most repositories probably won't have anything strikingly wrong with them. They will be okay. They'll be, in many cases, generally following policies. You might find a few problems here or there, but they're hygiene. access logging isn't turned on. You're not going to run up to the system and say, "Oh, I found a S3 bucket without access logging," and get funding for your program. And so there is that balancing act of no, we don't want to, we don't necessarily need a prerequisite of let's scan everything, but you have to think through what's that body of data where it's very likely I'm going to find something. And for some people, that ends up being M365. For most organizations, M365 is a dumpster fire because it's user controlled access and users are storing whatever they want. A lot of good wins there. For that's one instance. Where file shares as well on-prem. Sometimes you find a lot of problems there, but thinking through what can I start with where I'm going to be able to show some value early on, without trying to bite off everything and have no remediation to show for it, or compensating measures.
That's really smart, and just to add, select a representative subset or subset of repositories. I too have dealt with that. I was working. This is a while ago now in my career, but I was working with the organization. They wanted to start doing data discovery, but they only wanted to start with their PCI environment. And I remember I was talking to the QSA. Obviously, he was really concerned about the PCI environment. That's the one he wanted to scan. I remember talking to him and say, I hear you. I understand what your desires are, but me as the data security guy, I don't want to scan a PCI environment to show, hey, I've got PCI data. That's not interesting from a show value perspective, right? Like, I already know it's there. It's important to scan as part of PCI compliance. Certainly, I want to make sure there are security controls in place, again, for PCI compliance, but that should not be a full stop. And that's not the great usage of time to showcase, like, here's the value of data discovery. And, long story short, there, I got the agreement of my leadership to say, yes, I have to do this PCI thing. I'll get that done. But I'm glad you said it. I started going after our M365 environment because, yes, it was absolutely a dumpster fire. And multiple folks had their hands in the cookie jar of administration. So who knows what I was going to find. And, long story short, we found a lot of stuff. Right.
Right.
So, yeah, it's smart that you brought that up. Like, don't do everything, but don't do too small that everyone just shrugs their shoulders and says, okay, great. We bought this tool, we implement this tool, we did this thing for a couple weeks, couple months, whatever. What the heck was the value? Because now you're not building that trust. So for those that are listening, that are thinking about doing data discovery, like, do you have a recommendation on how they can start to identify the representative subset?
This is again a balancing act. And sometimes I think some of the best things to scan are not intuitive. So if you, most people, if you just present it to them and they haven't really had a chance to sit down and think about this, they are going to default to exactly what you were saying. What are my most critical repositories that have the most sensitive data? And I want to scan those first and identify if there's any data at risk in those repositories. But to your point, what can we know before we even scan those repositories? When we already know there's sensitive data. So in many cases, no matter what sensitive data we do scan, no one's going to care. So then you better hope that there's some risks that you identify. But in some cases, those things have already been beat 5 ways to Sunday by all sorts of other tools. And so you won't necessarily you might find a little bit on the margins that's outside of your ideal state for a data repository, but there's a good chance you might not find every user has admin credentials or something like that in that, or that's publicly exposed because some other tool would have already found something like that.
Hopefully.
And so hopefully, maybe not, in which case, man, you win you have your great win because it's a critical repository that so, so I'm not saying don't scan those, but in some cases, what makes sense to scan are just normal applications where you wouldn't expect sensitive data. In some cases, it's non-production because people might say, we don't have production sensitive data in our non-prod, therefore we don't need to secure it like a production repository. How often do you hear people say that? And then you go in and look and there is it's an exact replica of what's in production. And so there does need to be a balance there of certain most critical applications you ought to scan. But when you do, you should set the expectation up front. Hey guys, we need to scan this because we need to. It's a sensitive repository. Good chance we don't find anything here. And then think through what are some of those other not applications, but accounts, subscriptions, repositories we can scan that where there shouldn't be sensitive data, but if we do find it here, then it becomes really compelling. And then the last one too, something I do like about for anyone who stood up data scanning type tools before, they'll appreciate there's some upfront work that's required here from mostly a credentialing perspective and a deployment perspective. One thing I do like about SaaS repositories is it's usually just one deployment, one set of credentials, one time, and then you can see everything. So that's really nice from an upfront scaling perspective versus sometimes in the cloud, depending on the tool and the deployment model, you might be deploying account by account or management group by management group. And if you have a lot of different of those entities, it could take a long time to scale up.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I remember doing data discovery initiatives, man, 20
It's
years
gotten
ago,
better.
right?
It's gotten better.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking back to 20 years ago where cloud rift, I mean, it was around, but the organizations I was working within, they weren't doing anything with clouds. It was all on-prem. And to your point, actually the opposite of your points, it was a credential set for everything, right? Oh, this file share, here's the admin credentials, go after everything. This one's different, that one's different. This AS400 environment, right? So, the back ends, it was a nightmare, right? And I remember having I shudder that I'm going to say this out loud, but I'm going to a spreadsheet. We had a spreadsheet of all the locations and the credential sets, and it was crazy. It was crazy just thinking back to how big that thing was. And yes, for those listening, we did move everything to a password manager. So no, it didn't live forever in a spreadsheet, but it was nuts, right? When you think back to those, and yes, things have gotten, I would say, easier. Not super simple, but easier with cloud and SaaS. There's still the need for many cases to have multiple credential sets, but it's not nearly as bad as I used to be, as it used to be. So, all right, Zach, organization has started their data identification, data discovery initiatives. They're starting to get some findings, some metrics, whatever. From a show value perspective, where do they go next? What are the next steps?
One is, I hope even before they got here, and while they were going through it, they're using a tool, which I would recommend if you're really trying to do this at scale. They define their use cases. So what exactly am I trying to do? Sometimes uh, these discovery efforts really don't have an idea, like a good sense of themselves. Am I discovering for more, I would say legacy engineering purposes, like and data quality and making sure that if a column gets moved from this repository to this repository, that it stays intact and that all the numbers tie out. That's not really a security use case to me, but sometimes I see them get lumped in to a security run data discovery workstream. Is it about privacy? Is that why you're doing it, to comply with GDPR? Is it purely a risk reduction standpoint? Those are the three main ones that I see. Which one? Because you need to have that drawn out well before, or else you might overpromise and underdeliver. So based on those use cases that you've defined, you have to think through what those metrics look like. And if we're going to talk specifically from a security standpoint and risk reduction, I think one of the key metrics that you can think through, or that everyone should be using, is thinking through records at risk. And so trying to show risk at the data record level. Now we could debate a little bit what that means. Does that mean like an individual SSN, or does that mean a document that has SSNs? That's a little less important to me, but trying to get to that level, because what that allows your team to do is focus on those repositories, those particular OneDrives, those particular databases, columns that have the most of this data exposure and drive down that risk. And where that's really helpful is sometimes you'll get these scans back and you might see 1,000 databases that have credit cards in plain text. Well, how long is it going to take to address all of those? You're going to work all month and address 5 of them, and it looks terrible as a metric. But if you switch it to records at risk, now you're saying in a month, you might find that all 5 of them account for 60% of your risk. You address 5 of those, and then your charts, your burn downs look quite a bit better. And so I think there's a lot of different metrics that you can start showing to show value. One is coverage. How much of your estate am I covering? Um, there's, I mean, there's several more, but records at risk, I think, is one of the most compelling ones. It helps, again, prioritize what we really need to be prioritizing.
I like that. I haven't heard it called records at risk before. I think I'm going to start using that nomenclature because I think that's really smart. I think that resonates a lot better than some of the kludgy phrases I've tried to use in the past, for sure. That's great. That's great. So they're identifying their records at risk. They're showcasing some metrics around it. Hopefully, a reduction in those records at risk. What next? Where do they go from there?
Now you need to start thinking, at this point, this is really where we need to start aligning with. So hopefully now we've shown that this tool can, number one, scan things and not break processes. It's easy enough to scan up if you're using a tool, or if you're, your overall program. Let's get out of the technology and see your overall program. You have the right processes and workflows in place where you're able to onboard new repositories, understand them, get actionable asks and tickets, let's say, out to people who own these repositories. You're a functioning program. They see value in it. Then now is the point where we really need to start aligning with the business. Maybe we haven't scanned everything yet. Where else is this going to make sense? Will you derive value from this? And then also asking them questions about what challenges are you having with data that we could help you solve. Maybe you're worried about how data is sprawling across your organization or into other environments. We now have a bit of an inventory that we can search against. Can we help you there? Are there specific contractual or regulatory requirements, maybe around records retention, that we can help you with? Some of these, it's a little hard to just guess and make platform or program wide decisions on. If we see, a data that's of this age, we're going to reach out to the data owner for them to remediate it. You have to have that local conversation. And by showing this initial value, now you are really more organically spinning up these conversations, and you can sit down with folks and they'll be a little more open with you about, here's how your tool can help me. And then that just keeps building up that win book for you that you can show to leadership to show, here are actual business problems that we have been helping people solve with this tool, on top of our more foundational risk reduction metrics.
And all data security leaders need that win book. I would say all security leaders in general. I'll make it more broad because security is often looked at as a cost center.
Yes.
So when you keep pouring cost in it, CISOs out there sometimes have a hard time justifying spend and justifying an increase in their budget when the business isn't seeing value, the leaders aren't seeing value. It's tough. It's tough. I want to go back to another thing you said. You've actually mentioned it a few times. Data retention is a very interesting problem that organizations have been facing for many, many years. And I want to go back to that because it's something that I've talked about a few times lately with organizations. And the use case is, let's call it cloud transformation, broad use case. I've seen a lot of organizations say they're going to do a lift and shift methodology for their cloud transformation, right? Air quotes for those not watching the video. And I've dealt with this. Thinking about my last organization where, hey, I'm going to take this application historically on-prem, I'm going to move it to the cloud. And they call that cloud transformation. And I always kind of scratch my head like, what are you actually transforming? Yes, the medium it's standing on, but I'm bringing this back to you because I've tried to say like, look, I hear you. You're moving to the cloud, but do you have to take all the data to the cloud? Right? Do you need the 20 years worth of data, 10 of which is stale, or can you do some data discovery? Can you identify that stale, unused, uninteresting data, leave it out of your transformation, and oh, by the way, save yourself a few dollars on that transformation? Um, do you see that use case quite a bit with your customers?
I absolutely do. And I think it's one that is one of the easiest to articulate to business leaders and the one where they see the most value for them instead of just, I, I, I have to remediate something because it's security policy. No, this will actually help. It'll help uh, burn down costs for them, for instance, among probably some other, regulatory type compliance as well. Where I see this get caught up though, many times is when legal gets brought in and legal says, okay, well, yes, you're right. Some of this data can be deleted after 8 years, but some of this data, if we look at either uh, our own standards or maybe what's in the contract or some other regulatory requirements, some of it needs to be kept for 25 years. Some of it needs to be kept indefinitely. And then, God forbid if you're dealing applications less so, but if you're dealing with end user repositories a little more and you have legal hold, then it becomes an even bigger problem. And so that's where I see some of these efforts stall out. But if you do find one where the data owners are telling you, look, this is just one, all the data here is under a single retention standard, it's 10 years or something like that. Well, that's awesome. You pray for use cases like this. But otherwise, if you need to go and involve legal, it's a solvable problem. It's something you can figure out. But I always want to caution people that those can get a little more gnarly than you would expect. And if you're looking for a quick win to save a team on some cloud costs, it might not always be as quick of a win as you would expect.
Yeah, it's I mean, you hear that in all businesses out there. You know, things get super complicated when you bring in the lawyers, right? Legal, but
Maybe that's the problem. Just don't bring in the lawyers.
yeah, don't bring in the lawyers. No, no, listeners, that's exactly the opposite thing. You want to make friends with your legal team, and but it does definitely complicate things. And sometimes it's good, right? They're bringing in things you aren't thinking about. In some cases, it is that headache, and take some Tylenol and have those conversations because they're absolutely necessary. Um, so Zach, we talked a lot about data discovery, which I'll just call on premise, right? We talked about cloud, but I'll call that on premise. Do you have any thoughts around, metrics, KPIs, KRIs, what have you, for, I'll just call it data in motion, right? So data potentially leaving or being stopped from leaving an organization. Any words of advice for leaders trying to show value there in the way of metrics?
So there's probably a crawl, walk, run when we're thinking about data in motion. Crawl is today I have all these vectors that are unsanctioned opened. I blocked one vector. Here's how much volume of traffic we were seeing go that route before. Here's where we're down to now. We know that some of this data is sensitive. You don't say it this, perhaps you don't say it this explicitly, but we aren't sure how much of it is, but we know some of it is. And so this addresses a risk. Another thing that I highly recommend is starting to build out some sort of insider threat program for that. I think most organizations that are sizable, they have data that they really want to protect. If they really are taking data security seriously, you need to be thinking through an insider threat program. And as part of that, data detection and response as a piece of that. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, that program really forces you to develop your muscles around tracking and monitoring and building metrics around data going places that it shouldn't go. But the other really important piece is metrics are great. Stories are just as good to back those up. And through your insider threat program, that's where you get the case notes to develop those stories. So now you can say, hey, before we had removable media and enabled, and we were losing terabytes a quarter, and now, or gigabytes, whatever it is, and now we're down to way less than that. Here's an example of, one thing that we have seen in the past that now gets blocked. This person was about to leave the company. They stuck in a removable media stick, a USB. They exfiltrated all this data to it. We detected it before and we had to respond to it, but now we block that straight up, so we don't even have to worry about it. So that's where now you're kind of getting into phase two. Phase three, though, is where you have done this discovery. Maybe you have purchased a DSPM, you deployed it, you have a better understanding of where your sensitive data is, you've tagged it. Now figuring out, how do I leverage that brain, that data classification brain in my DLP, my in motion data security tool. So again, it could be tagging. And now we build tools, we build policies around that tagging or detections around that. And now we're better able to tell the story of, not only did we block this many uploads, but those uploads contained this much restricted information versus confidential, versus some of it was kind of it was benign, personal. So that doesn't really matter to you. But that's where I would say, stage one, just raw data volume is great. Stage two, if you can start baking in some stories to tell, and then stage three, kind of marrying what you've learned in your discovery project with your in motion controls.
That's fantastic, and that's definitely what I've often told people is the better together story. And honestly, it's a story that in some organizations that I've worked for has been missed because oftentimes, and I've seen this from some of my peers, they get brought into an organization. The leaders say, "Congratulations, you're now an employee. Stop data from going out." And the knee-jerk reaction for many is, "Okay, let's build the castle walls first," which there's value there, right? You got to have walls. You got to have walls. But what they're missing is, since they're relying on only the walls, they don't yet have the context, the data. Like, we stopped this thing at the perimeter. I don't really know what it was. I know it had PII. Congratulations. Was it a W-2 or was it something else? Um, and said better together that now, and I like how you put it into three tiers. You're in that third tier. Not only did you stop it, but you know what the heck it was because you have context around it. You know it's highly restricted, whatever the classification, because of these things. That's fantastic.
Exactly.
Well, Zach, we've talked a lot about showing value, and it's clear you've done this a time or two. So tell us, you're currently a data security practice director at TBD Cyber. How would you get there? What was your path in your career?
I started out at Ernst& and Young. I was an IT auditor, and so I was looking specifically at Sarbanes-Oxley IT controls. So I was helping the financial auditors make sure that these systems they were pulling financial statement metrics from and evaluating were secure in a way. Um, that access controls were in place, they were being backed up, that people couldn't just go and make random changes to these systems. That was not necessarily the most exciting job in the world, but what it did was it got me skilled at getting details from people who didn't necessarily want to talk to you because you were an auditor, and making good relationships with them. And then just a good overall understanding of, what does enterprise IT look like? Because you're touching on so many systems that have financial data. And from there, I went in, stuck in audit, but went to Cigna. I was an internal auditor there. And this was right around the time I feel like information security was taking off, was when I was, so all my projects were around information security. And they had me, this young kid, who was going in and asking incident response teams about, oh, are you abiding by NIST, and how is your program working? And so they trusted me more than they should have to go in and do these sort of assessments. But I learned so much, and it was a great opportunity. And then from there, I went and I built an information security program for a small college in Tennessee as their first CISO. Um, And so I started out as sort of this auditor, security generalist type, and then that's when after that I went to Deloitte and was a manager of data security engineering internally. So that's when I really started getting exposed to DLP, to data discovery, what all this meant. And then from there, I got a chance to work with someone we both know and love, Ernie, at Kadelski Security. And that was a boutique or a mid-sized information security consultancy, led that data security practice. And then when he built TBD Cyber, it brought me over to do the same thing. And so I've been helping organizations really assess, design, and then build out data security programs this entire time. And it's been fantastic. It's great working with these clients and watching their journey.
And that's an interesting entry point. Going back to how you started as I'm just going to call you the enemy here for a second, right? Because I think, and I'm sure some of the listeners, right? We all love to hate the auditors because they make our lives difficult. But that's an interesting entry point. Most folks I talk to, folks like yourself, I ask them this question, how'd you get here? It's usually an IT journey, right? Oh, I started on the help desk. From the help desk, I went and did this thing. And then, I tripped and stumbled into cyber and now here I am. Um, I can't say that I've personally ever thought of starting a cybersecurity career in audit, but man, oh man, does that make a lot of sense.
It is strange, because I started very broad. Like, when you think about audit, this 500-foot view of you're starting with the security policies and standards, and then you're going and you're making sure that they're being followed across the organization. And so I started so broad. And then when I started getting these information security positions, I had to kind of work backward from everyone else and say, like, all right, I understand at a high level what needs to be done and how security aligns with the business. I don't understand what grep is, and I don't understand how to make a bash script. And I don't really understand what all these security, like, I understand, I've talked about them before, but I don't really get what a SIM is. And so I had to build the other way versus someone who might start as a blue teamer and then go out. And I think they both have their pros and cons, but it's just where I ended up. So yeah, it is. I don't typically encounter it either.
That's amazing. So if you could go back in time to the beginning, right? When you started off in audit, is there any words of advice you'd give yourself?
So when I was in audit, I kept getting this feeling that I was trapped. I desperately wanted to get into information security. And I got this feeling that I was trapped. And I think a lot of young people feel that who want to get into information security. They look at all the things that these people in security know, and they feel like I'll never be able to get there. No one's ever going to give me a shot. I wish I could have just sat down and said, settle down a little bit, just keep that passion alive, reach out to people, have earnest conversations. Just don't go around asking people for jobs. It's so the wrong way to go about it. But build connections, or just try to get to know people and understand what they do, and build the skills that you want to build, not the ones that you think you need to get into security, because the needs are going to change. Find what you're passionate about, build that out, showcase it to the world. Your time will come. Your time will come. You'll get your chance.
It's amazing advice you'd give to yourself, but I think amazing advice for our listeners as well. I look at LinkedIn quite a bit, as I'm sure you do as well. There's a lot of folks right now trying to break in. That's kind of group A. There's a lot of folks that unfortunately have lost their jobs, right? Rifts, other types of layoffs, whatever. So there's a lot of folks looking for jobs. I know a big advice I give to folks is, and you said the same, network, but network meaningfully. Don't just connect with everybody, say, hey, are you hiring? Hey, can you get me a job? Here's my resume. That's not meaningful. It's actually having meaningful conversations, engaging with posts, engaging with people. Last question I have for you. And it's going to be a little bit new. I haven't asked any other guest this question. But I think you might have some interesting insight here. We're in what, September, end of September here, so we're going to be going into Q4 relatively quick. Any thoughts on the data security front? What's going to be big in 2026?
Am I being too cliched to say that AI is going to be on everyone's mind? I mean, I that's yeah. I was sitting there for a second, trying to come up with something that's more novel than that because that's going to be everyone's response. But oh my gosh, every client I'm talking to, they just ask me, "Hey, AI, so do you have any experience dealing with data security risk on that front?" Both from I have developers standing up AI platforms in my cloud environments. I have people who are going to various AI, Gen AI services from their endpoints. I don't want to just block it because I know they're getting use out of it. What the heck am I going to do about it? That's just going to continue to grow and snowball throughout 2026. But the other thing, there's another side of AI as well. So I feel like every security conversation with AI, there's the risk side, but then there's the capability side. And the capability side is where I'm also really excited about more advanced ML, about Gen AI, because we were talking about that discovery conversation earlier, where historically tools just have not been equipped to supply the business context to really understand how sensitive some data is. That is slowly starting to change now as these tools are able to meaningfully incorporate Gen AI, where you basically are getting, a tool that can look at a file that might not have SSNs, it might not have the typical things that ring alarm bells, but if you have something with a little bit of a brain that looks at it, it can say, this is probably sensitive data, and I think this is a financial projection, or I think this might be a marketing strategy, or it might be talking about an M&A. Really hard to detect in the regex. We're getting there now with discovery tools, and that's so exciting. When you think about the level of effort to conduct a good data discovery assessment, what some of these, primarily in the DSPM space, data security posture management vendors are doing, is pretty exciting.
Man, I definitely like that answer. I was gonna boo you at first for saying AI, but I think you saved yourself because I agree. I agree. I mean, AI has been the big thing. You go to any conference, it's chock full. The last 2 years, right? Chock full of that those two letters, and I think you're right. I think 2026, dare I say, 2027 is going to be, I don't want to say more of the same. It's going to be more of AI, but we are going to see, new capabilities, probably some new risks all popping up around those good old two letters. So, Zach, if folks want to connect with you, what's the best way to do so?
Just on my LinkedIn, I think there's not very many Zach Luzes in the world, Luze. So you should be able to find me pretty easily there. That's definitely the best way. You can also, another easy one, you can reach out to me at zach@tbdcyber.com.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Zach, thank you so much for joining me today.
It was awesome being with you, Ward. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Absolutely. This has been another exciting episode of Guardians of the Data. Big thank you to the audience. Really hope you enjoyed the episode and learned something today. Please tell others in your network to follow and listen. See you next time. That's a wrap on another episode of Guardians of the Data. Thanks for tuning in. For show notes and more, visit guardiansofthedata.show. Guardians of the Data is made possible by support from Centro. To see how we help organizations discover and classify all of their data accurately and automatically while quickly achieving petabyte scale data protection without the fuss, please visit centro.io. Catch you next time.